the Memphis Grizzlies had a pretty busy weekend, especially to start out these festivities on Friday. Not quite the splash that Damichael or I predicted in free agency, but it certainly was a significant move to folks that reside in Memphis, and particularly to people that are fans of the Memphis Tigers circa 2008. Derrick Rose is a Memphis Grizzly. That is wild to say out loud. We're going to lead off with it on this Monday edition of the show. Let's lock in.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
It is a 4th of July Eve edition of Locked On Grizzlies, and you have the dynamic duo with you. Not matching in terms of T-shirts this time around.
No,
is,
blue, black.
Mildly disappointing. I'm in blue. Again, it's black, blue, or white. It's going to be one of those three almost every single time.
Joe, do you like blueberries or blackberries more? Do you have a preference?
I like them both. I like them both. There's lots of directions I could have gone there, but this is a family-friendly show. Welcome to Locked On Grizzlies. I am Joe Mullinax, and Damichael, this is nice, Grizzlies columnist over at Bluff City Media. Drew Norton was officially announced as the new editor of Grizzlies content, so I'm able to go back to just, being the guy that everybody yells out about Grizzlies stuff over at Bluff City Media. So it was fun working my old job for a couple of months in the absence of Parker Fleming after his departure, but back to normal over at Bluff City Media as Summer League begins. Joined, of course, by my colleague, you all know Damichael Cole, Commercial Appeal, Memphis Grizzlies beat writer. Damichael will be heading out to Las Vegas by the end of the week. You'll see him hanging out, living in the casinos, I'm sure, and all those fun things, and just living that Summer League life. But the Grizzlies are one of the few teams in the NBA that are playing in the first wave of Summer League in Salt Lake City. So technically, as weird as it is to say out loud, it's July 3rd, and there's Memphis Grizzlies basketball on the docket. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts as proud members of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every day. And this episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by PrizePicks. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with a promo code Locked On. That's PrizePicks.com, promo code Locked On. Like, comment, rate, review, subscribe, YouTube, wherever you get podcasts, all those fun things. Damichael, I'm going to let you take the lead on this segment because, as we talked a little bit about before the show, I lived in Memphis for 3 years.
This is a 901 segment,
to 2014. So I consider myself an adopted son of Memphis. Yeah. Maybe an adopted son that Memphis wishes they hadn't adopted, but an adopted son nonetheless. I still love Memphis, love visiting, all those sorts of things. Obviously, I still do this almost a decade removed from leaving the city. So I'm clearly passionate about the Grizzlies and the city. But you live there, you moved away for a little while, you came back, you grew up there. Tell me what Derrick Rose, Memphis Grizzlies guard, means to you. Because from reading the reaction on social media on Friday night, there's a lot of people who say when Derrick Rose enters the game for the Memphis Grizzlies in October on opening night, he'll probably play. When that occurs, it will be one of the biggest moments in the history of sports in the city of Memphis.
No exaggeration, Joe. I probably had, let me see, because I want to give as close to an accurate number as possible.
Sure.
I want to say 20 people. I've probably had 20 people tell me I'm going to get season tickets now.
Wow.
Because Derrick Rose is back in Memphis. This guy is not from here, but I've written about it. I've talked about it. If you go to Ching's Wings over there on Getwell, you're going to see about 2 or 3 pictures of Derrick Rose in there. If you go to University of Memphis, if you go to the FedEx Forum, you're going to see pictures of Derrick Rose. This guy is one of the best things that happened to Memphis in the past 20 years. He was amazing. He was one of the top players in the country. He commits here. He leads the Tigers to a 38-2 record that, quote unquote, doesn't exist anymore. But
Don't you love that the NCAA does that?
Yeah, like they can just go inside of everyone's brains and just take that out of their brains. Like, no, you can't do that. But Derrick Rose, he's a big part of Memphis history, and he's a cultural guy. And what makes Derrick Rose stand out, I don't even think he tried to be a cultural guy. Right. He wasn't an Allen Iverson or Ja Morant from a personality standpoint in terms of his outgoing ways. He always has felt like it's always been like he's kind of sheltered, but he's one of those guys where it almost feels like he's from Memphis because he grew up in the south side of Chicago and you hear the stories about how he grew up, what he went through, and he came to Memphis. I remember I was growing up because this was 2008. I was preteen at this point. But I remember those days and people who, would say, oh, I seen Derrick Rose here. I seen Derrick Rose there. Like, he was out. He had fun while he was in Memphis. So he's kind of become, like you just said about yourself, an adopted son in a way. And there's just something storybook about this, right? There's a storybook thing about him coming back to Memphis and being able to potentially even finish his career here. But having this part of his career happen with the Grizzlies, not just because he's with the Grizzlies while they're on the uptick here, not just because of he's here, and Ja Morant has gotten all the comparisons to him. None of that, even though all of that is huge. But the fact that Derrick Rose led the Tigers to arguably their best season ever, some people will say it's one of their best, but to one of the best seasons in program history, and he's back to potentially lead the Grizzlies to one of their best seasons in franchise history. It's very storybook, but we got to talk about what it means on the court. And Joe, I know you got some things to say about that.
Well, I think, it's kind of nice when something happens on a Friday and, you and I don't have to rush to re-record.
You like get to cool down. Recently.
You get to cool down a little bit. And I worked a lot for Bluff City Media on Friday night. I did like 3 or 4 articles in the span of a few hours. I felt like you're one of the hardest working folks in sports media there in Memphis. I felt like you for a few fleeting moments. I think that I love a good story. Like, if you followed my work over the years, you've read some of my favorite articles I've ever written are very much storybook kind of things, narratives. I'm a big guy on narratives. Right. So everything you just said, I completely understand. And that's why I'm not going to do what I think people expect me to do.
You can't lash out on Derrick Rose. That's like a Memphis rule.
Because I have said on Twitter and I've said on the show that they are a legitimate wing. Somebody that they can count on, and we'll talk more about what that means here in a moment, away from being a legitimate NBA Finals contender, right? I truly believe that. They're not that far from the Denver Nuggets when everybody's healthy and on the court together. Denver would be favored in a 7-game series. They should be. Phoenix Suns would be favored. Golden State Warriors would probably be favored. I would take the Grizzlies in a 7-game series against most of those teams while understanding there's going to be reasons why they wouldn't win, if that makes sense. Yeah. I'm that much of a believer in Marcus Smart, who I know the Grizzlies are, going to eventually introduce. I know you'll talk more about that when you're able, maybe later in the show. But anyway, I think that the fascinating thing about Derrick Rose is all evidence suggests that he's washed. Like he's not good at basketball anymore. He has struggled the last couple of years. Staying on the floor. When he has been on the floor, he has put up numbers that are worse than Dillon Brooks shooting in several categories. And people wanted Dillon Brooks out of here as quickly as possible. We'll talk more about Dillon Brooks here in a few minutes. But I think that it's an interesting – over the weekend, I decided to view this offseason between Marcus Smart and now Derrick Rose through the lens of trying to save Ja Morant. Because you could sign Taurean Prince if you want for the full mid-level exception. That's probably what it would have taken, an overpay to get him. I think he signed with the Lakers. You could sign some of these guys and check my box that I said. But if they are not in a position to mentor and be good role models for Ja Morant, none of it matters. Because he's the guy that's going to make them that championship contending team. So Marcus Smart, we've already talked about the phenomenal person off the court that he's become, all the things he does in the community, the tremendous competitor he is on the floor. Before Ja Morant was Ja Morant, Derrick Rose was Ja Morant, at least in terms of the rapid ascent in the NBA. One of the youngest, if not the youngest, I'm sure you'll correct me on that.
Yeah,
the youngest, thank you, MVP in the history of the National Basketball Association. If he can't learn from those two guys, it might be Ja, and it might be time to cut ties, to be honest with you. Like, this feels like a Grizzlies olive branch to me of you're on strike 2, We are going to give you every opportunity to be successful. We didn't have veterans that you would listen to before. Now there's 2 in the locker room that if you don't listen to them, it's your fault.
I get that. I get that, but we can't forget. We can't forget this, Joe. Well, you clearly forgot this part, but I haven't forgot. 2 years ago, Derrick Rose was a 6th Man of the Year finalist. It was just 2021. And then let's go to 2022, right? 2021-2022 season, that is. 2022, this guy averaged 12 points per game on 45% shooting, 44.5%.
Was there a season that happened after that season, though?
Those aren't Dillon Brooks numbers.
Was there a season that was canceled this past season? Did this not happen?
Let's get into that. If you look at what happened that season in New York, I read a lot. I talked to a couple people up there, and it made perfect sense what I heard. And we seen it too from afar. Emmanuel Quickly, Miles McBride, those guys are on the uptick. And what D Rose eventually became was just, a mentor type veteran around there. To the point, remember, I think we mentioned his name. I know I talked about him at the trade deadline, but
you did.
But it was to the point where he was a popular name at the trade deadline, not even just in terms of with the Grizzlies, just in general. But the Knicks decided to hold on to him. And Tom Thibodeau constantly talked about how he loves his presence in the locker room and he's a positive influence on the players. I think the Grizzlies, from what I've heard at least, they did their background on him. They did their research. And they feel like this is a guy who can be a positive influence in the locker room. But not only just that, they think he can play, Joe. They're not getting him. Look, this is what I know. They're not getting him to be Udonis Haslem. They are getting him to be someone who can be effective on the floor and who can be that shoulder. Say, hey, Ja, I was there. I was the 23-year-old MVP, and I had the league in my hands. I was going toe-to-toe with LeBron James at 22 years old. Like, I was that guy. D Rose can say all that. There's nothing that Ja Morant has done that D Rose didn't go through early in his career. None of these flashy things in Ja Morant's career can phase D Rose because he was that guy, as you mentioned earlier. But my thing is, as we get to the on the floor impact, I talked about this a lot. I didn't think they were going to get some big wing with this last move or anything. It was always going to be a guard because they don't have the depth. Adding D Rose gives you that extra insurance policy. No, I don't expect him to be a 6th Man of the Year finalist or anything like that. But while Ja Morant's out, he's going to play heavier minutes. We'll see what his minutes looks like when Ja gets back. But I think there's still some buckets in that body of D Rose.
We can talk more about it on a future installment of Locked On Grizzlies. Again, yeah. I like the signing. I think that it was a missed opportunity, but as we talked about, it wasn't Josh Richardson, but it was a player like we talked about, a guard. Depth there was important. And I do think that they still could be working the phones to maybe try to do what we have talked about and what I especially have talked about in terms of securing that bigger wing. We'll talk about that in the official departure of Dillon Brooks from the Memphis Grizzlies next here on Locked On Grizzlies. But first, this episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is still active in terms of more or less player projections, even though the NBA season is over. I'll be honest, I don't know if they have summer league gambling. If they do, goodness gracious, I hope
they do. They do.
Oh, gosh.
I can't do it. I can't do it. But they do.
Well, anyway, thankfully, this is daily fantasy with PrizePicks, so we don't have to worry about that here. And you are picking against the projections available. That's what you're competing against, not other folks. You can do it with sports that are currently active, like Major League Baseball, the WNBA, and others. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It is that easy with safe and fast withdrawals. Download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users will receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code Locked On. If you deposit $100, PrizePicks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, PrizePicks will give you $50. Don't forget to enter the promo code Locked On and sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. We're talking the departure of Dillon Brooks and the arrival of a player, but I think that the other part of it matters a little bit more. Maybe Damichael will disagree with me. We'll talk about that next here on Locked On Grizzlies. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am one of your hosts, Joe Mullinax, joined by my wonderful co-host, Damichael Cole of the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee, Grizzlies beat writer for that publication. I am the Grizzlies columnist for Bluff City Media, and I also contribute to SB Nation. Damichael, you look at what the Grizzlies did with Derrick Rose, and again, there will be more time to talk about the on-the-court fit. I do think that on the court, or at least moving forward, what's going to be interesting is how they handle replacing Dillon Brooks, who is now officially, well, as official as it can be, because they haven't announced it from the league perspective yet, a Houston Rocket, right? 4 years, $80 million, which, by the way, you and I both predicted that. Everybody getting their
You called it. You called it, and people came after you, Joe. You should take a victory lap. I think you deserve a victory lap.
I'm pretty sure I said that's literally the contract I said, is it not? 4 years, $80 million? Yeah. That is literally the contract I said. So,
you deserve a victory lap, my friend.
I'm just going to pat myself on the back because everybody likes to point out when I'm wrong. I was exactly right.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, Dillon is gone, whether it's LaRavia, Roddy, Williams. We can talk more about that. I'm not super stoked about it.
No.
But I do think it's important to point out for a variety of reasons, right? Restricted free agency, contract extensions. There's all sorts of other pieces moving. That trade has not, that signing has not been officially announced as of yet, in part because there are still circulations of Memphis being a part of a larger trade. It is going to be a sign and trade, as was reported over the weekend. Josh Christopher, I believe, is his name.
Yep.
His nickname, can you?
He's a bucket getter.
But what is like the Jadiup or something? I'm sure that I just butchered that.
I don't know.
I have no idea.
I know he's Josh Christopher from Arizona State. He got buckets, and he averaged 29 in the G League.
There you go. So I do think those are all things to be excited about. And one thing that I'll point out, well, two things. One, the traded player exception that's going to be generated is going to be, and again, correct me if I'm wrong on this, somewhere in the neighborhood of around $16 million for the Memphis Grizzlies, which obviously, we've talked about Dorian Finney-Smith on here before, Royce O'Neal. There's lots of different players, depending on how this all plays out, that could theoretically fit inside of that traded player exception.
Yeah. Also,
the Grizzlies now have 16 players once this goes through under contract. Am I correct in that?
You're right.
There's only 15 that can be now. Right now, that doesn't matter. As long as they are down to 15 by opening night, they are good to go. So that could mean somebody will be waived, somebody will be traded. More business has to be handled by the Memphis Grizzlies, Damichael. It's not over yet.
It's not, but here's what I think. Because we saw this last summer. Do you remember?
I do.
We had to choose between, I think we were choosing, if I remember, it was like Killian Tilly or John Conchar or something like that.
It's always Conchar in the middle of this.
We were on the same page that we thought it should be Tilly. But
correct.
What ended up happening was he was waived because of the injury woes there. I think the Grizzlies shouldn't even think about this roster thing going into the preseason. Just let it play out. Because Josh Christopher has game. You don't automatically say, oh, he hasn't been here. We're gonna just waive him, get him and waive him. No, you got to let this thing play out. I think he's a 2. He can play the 3. He fits. And we just talked about him averaging 29 in G League, and guess what? David Roddy, Jake LaRavia, those guys ain't averaged 29 in G League. I think they look good down there. Don't get me wrong, but they ain't averaged 29. So with that
let me throw out something real crazy. Sorry to cut you off. Let's say this trade gets finalized Wednesday or Thursday, right, in the next 72 hours or so. What's to say that Josh Christopher isn't in Las Vegas by the weekend with you, hanging out poolside, playing some summer league basketball for the Memphis Grizzlies?
Taking up a starting spot there now. Vince Williams got to come off the bench or something. But all jokes aside, I think it's easy to me. I think you just let it play out. You go through the preseason. We know how the Grizzlies have done it in the past. The starters will probably play one game, then they'll sit the next one. Right. He'll have ample opportunity to separate himself. I think we'll have the conversation about who those bottom 3, bottom 4 guys are. And just looking at it right now, I do think, Josh Christopher is potentially the odd man out just from, experience perspective. But I think he will get the opportunity. If he plays well in the summer league, not summer league, if he plays well in the preseason, guess what? Somebody else is toast. And you know as well as anybody, based on the polls that you've did, the conversations you've had, that people don't want to let these guys go.
No. Even guys that are literally on the active roster because other dudes were hurt. See, for me, you're exactly right. I would let it play out. There's no need to rush this. Again, preseason, they can have 16 contracts. They just got to get to 15 by the end of the preseason.
Yeah.
For me, Damichael, it's going to be fascinating to see how they decide to not utilize this traded player exception. Whenever it's done, do they see it as something, okay, let's make this move now, and they send out numerous pieces to get to that 15 now? Do they have that in their back pocket? Because I think it lasts a calendar year. Do they have it in their back pocket for the trade deadline, seeing where they're at? Brandon Clark, right? By the time they get to training camp, we'll have another 3 months of treatment and rehab for Brandon Clark. I think that's significant. If Brandon Clark is 8 months away still, and there's no indicators that he would be, but if he has a setback or something along those lines, Kenneth Lofton Jr. might be more safe, and it might be Christopher that has to be waived. But if Brandon Clark is, he's going to be back around the first of the year, if he's ahead of schedule or something along those lines, and you're healthy in the front court, or you will be eventually, and you think you can survive the first 30 games and you really believe in Christopher's talent, a lot of folks aren't going to like it, but Kenneth Lofton Jr. might be expendable. And then there's John Concho.
You've talked about that before. People can't imagine Kenneth Lofton Jr. being expendable. You started a fire with you. We said we were going to talk about that on the episode, so we'll say
we will. We have a versus coming up. We do. But anyway, we'll end this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. We'll talk about Kenneth Lofton Jr. on the roster because he is on the summer league roster for the Memphis Grizzlies, and I have a feeling he's going to get some buckets tonight against the Philadelphia 76ers. Damichael and I will preview Salt Lake City Summer League next here on Locked On Grizzlies. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am Joe Mullinax, one of your hosts. I am a Grizzlies columnist over at Bluff City Media. I also contribute to SB Nation, joined by my co-host Damichael Cole of the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee, at Damichael C on Twitter, at Joe Mullinax for me. Between us, lots of experience, lots of writing, lots of content generated on the Memphis Grizzlies. You've come to the right place for Grizzlies content. Hopefully you'll continue to do so as an everydayer.
We didn't match shirts today, though. We definitely
no.
We're blue and black together.
Next time we're making the hot takes black and blue. We're giving bruises out. That was terrible. Gosh, I'm not going to edit it because I deserve to be ridiculed for that joke. But anyway, later on in the week when we're back together, post 4th of July, we'll coordinate. We'll talk about it. Obviously, we're excited about Grizzlies roster movement, but we're also excited because Grizzlies basketball is technically back. It's summer league. It's a lot of young guys that are getting reps, but it's guys running up and down a court wearing Memphis Grizzlies colors, Grizzlies across the chest. Yeah. It's going to be fun to watch again, and it's going to be really cool to see. Again, the opponent is irrelevant. No offense to the 76ers. It doesn't matter unless the Grizzlies were to play Wembanyama or something like that in Vegas, or if there's some other major rookie that they might see.
Yeah.
No offense to Philly. This is going to be a focus on the Grizzlies we're excited to see, and I'll let you go first, partner. I think I know who you're going to say.
It's a no-brainer.
But what player, that as you watch tonight, you are going to be most interested in terms of how they look? Because if they drop 50, that doesn't matter as much as how they do it, right? That's one of the things about Summer League. You want to see, shooting stroke, body positioning. Can they dominate multiple facets of the game? Josh Selby always stands out in my mind as a guy that you don't want to say, oh, he just scored a whole bunch of points. That guy can play in the NBA. Well, that's not always the case. No. It's how do they rebound? How they defend? Do they dominate multiple areas of the game of basketball? That's usually a pretty solid indicator of whether or not they can play in an NBA rotation.
Yeah, Joe, you just spit it all out. You just said it all. I mean, I'm not watching for that. And everyone, come on. I mean, you guys know who I'm going to say as my choice. If you've been listening to Locked On Grizzlies for the last month at least, I mean, you don't have to be a listener for the last year. If you've been listening for the last month, you know what I'm going to say. It's Jake LaRavia. Jake LaRavia is the guy I have the most attention on in Summer League. And I've also said this. I don't care if he shoots 1 of 15 tomorrow. So what? If Jake LaRavia is letting it fly, he's taking shots that he's comfortable with, I think that's good to see from the Grizzlies standpoint. Because guess what? The proof is in the pudding. He shot 37%, a little bit, 36.5 or so in the G League. You go back to his college days, he shot, above average as well, 38% or so. The proof is in the pudding. Even if you just look at his stroke, you just look at the mechanics. His teammates talk about it. Taylor Jenkins, they all say they want to see him shoot the basketball more. If he shows the aggressiveness, that's important for Jake LaRavia out of all the other guys, because you don't have to tell Kenneth Lofton Jr. to be more aggressive, because he's calling for the ball. He's going to get on the block. He's going to.
You need to tell him to chill out more.
Yeah, you got to tell him to chill out. Jake LaRavia, I told you this. I talked to Steve Forbes over there at Wake Forest, former collegiate coach, and everyone else that I talked to about Jake LaRavia. They all say he's super unselfish. It's a good thing for him because he's going to make the right play. But sometimes, this is what I heard, Joe. Sometimes he make the play that's too right. I've never heard that before. But think of it like this, because some people say, what? That doesn't make sense. Well, think of it like this. If two people are open and Jake LaRavia gets the basketball and he's wide open, and there's the guy beside him who's 32% as a three-point shooter, and someone's closing out on Jake LaRavia, conventional wisdom say, oh, well, pass it over to the next guy, and he gets the wide open shot. But Jake LaRavia, as a guy who can shoot 38% from three-point line, you don't pass it to a 32% shooter. You take that shot because you're the better shooter. That's like me and Joe. If I'm wide open, I take the shot and I don't pass it to Joe. So with that being said,
whoa. Why am I catching strays all of a sudden?
Because Joe, you've been talking about beating me in basketball for the longest time. I just had to throw that in there. That's all.
Fair.
That's
fair enough.
That's all. But the thing with Jake LaRavia is, I think he just has to be aggressive. That's it. That's all you want to see. If he shoots 4 or 15, I'm sure there are going to be people say, oh, he's a bust and oh, he's not ready. You're not watching Jake LaRavia to see that, because quite frankly, the shots that these guys are going to get in the summer league, and you can go back to last summer league. Look at the shots Santi was getting compared to the ones he took with the Grizzlies in the regular season. Mm-hmm. Completely different look, because you don't have Ja Morant crossing guys over and flying to the rim. You don't have Desmond Bane at the three-point line. You don't have Jaren Jackson Jr. commanding double teams. It's a completely different look. But Jake LaRavia is my guy. Who you got?
I think that LaRavia is a good pick. Since you've taken LaRavia, I'm going to say Gigi Jackson. And maybe that's a bit of an upset, because obviously there's other Grizzlies.
Hey, I saw the Twitter. I saw the Twitter comments over there. And the people don't think you're a fan of Gigi Jackson, Joe.
Well, maybe you can help me with this.
Okay.
You know, the fact of, why are people, Grizzlies fans are funny. Like, they need to play the ballers. They need to play the hoopers. Like, what the hell does that even mean? Are you trying to tell me that David Roddy is not a hooper, or Jake LaRavia is not a hooper, or Kenneth Lofton Jr.? Or Kenneth Lofton Jr. probably is a hooper.
Yeah, he's
in the eyes of those that say that. I just struggle with the idea there's a guy who turned 18 in the middle of his basketball season, played in the SEC for a variety of reasons. Context is important, but he struggled at times.
Yeah.
And
38% shooter.
He has admitted that, right? Maybe he shouldn't have been treated like Paul George in the SEC as an 18-year-old. I think that might be a fair criticism of his coaching, or the coaching of him. But I just want to see, putting all that aside, there's a reason that he was the number one recruit in the class of 2023 before he reclassified, right? Mm-hmm. There's clearly physical ability. Clearly there is talent. To your point about LaRavia, if Gigi struggles tonight, does that mean he's the wrong pick? Absolutely not. They selected him in the second round with the 45th pick. This is a guy who, again, I'll say it because it was true. If he hadn't had reclassified, he was the number one recruit in the graduating class of 2023. He would be going to college now. But instead of going to college now, he is in the National Basketball Association as a draft pick, probably a two-way player for the Memphis Grizzlies. but I want to watch him play. I want to see how fluid he is as an athlete. I just want to see that basic movement because I think that the Grizzlies, among all the NBA teams, they are some of the best in terms of utilizing the Memphis hustle for development purposes.
Yeah.
So I actually love the GG Jackson pick from that perspective. If you look at GG Jackson and expect him to be in the NBA rotation of a hopeful finals contender, you're going to be really freaking disappointed. If you look at him as a guy that hopefully he's good in 2 years when they sign him to a contract that's an NBA contract and he can play rotation minutes when the money gets tight for the overall roster, that to me sets you up for success when analyzing what he does on the floor starting tonight.
I'm excited to see GG as well. You bring up a great point. You're talking about the fact that he's an 18-year-old. Joe, I saw all the Twitter hoopla that was going on yesterday, and I actually agreed with you, on this. I thought you were on the money. He's 18, and he's about to go against, not in Summer League, but just in general. You're going to put this 18-year-old against 30-year-old grown men who have been playing, and I think that's unfair.
In training camp, he's going to drive at the basket against Steven Adams and Jaren Jackson Jr.
He's a teenager.
He's 18. And he's going to drive at Steven Adams, because everything we've heard is he's going to be healthy for camp. At Steven Adams and Jaren Jackson Jr.
It's not going to be fun.
It's not going to end well for him. But that's okay. I want to stress that. That's okay.
Yeah, you want to see confidence from him more than anything. Just get some shots up. Take all the shots that you normally take, the fadeaways, the pull-up jumpers. He does a lot of stuff off the dribble. You want to see all that from GG Jackson. You just want to see, the whole package. You want to see the package. He is a hooper. I like hoopers. It's a cultural thing. What's the difference between a basketball player and a hooper? A basketball player is Jason Kidd. A hooper is Allen Iverson. They both play point guard, but the hoopers are the bucket getters. GG Jackson is a bucket getter. Hoopers, basically, in a different way to put it, hoopers, efficiency doesn't matter. Efficiency is not a stat in hooper. So you get it. It's the Monte Ellis out there. It's the Jamal Crawford. Carmelo Anthony. Okay. They're the hoopers. Kevin Durant can be a hooper, but he can also be a basketball player. But anyways, with all that being said, I'm excited to see GG, and I'm excited to see a lot of these guys. Even Kenneth Lofton Jr. We'll talk plenty about him because I'm sure he's going to have a big game at some point. I want to see his progress on defense, right? If you've been following us here, you know that offense is not the reason he's not on the floor. It's defense.
Right.
He has to be quicker laterally. The Grizzlies play a certain system on defense. They want to incorporate him into that. They don't want to adjust the system around Kenneth Lofton Jr. They want him to be able to play their style of defense. That wasn't the case this rookie year. So that's going to be something to watch as well. David Roddy, what else can he do outside of the spot-up three-point shots? We saw the spot-up three-pointers. I think David Roddy's 240-plus pounds. Get to the basket. Bully these little summer league guys. Show us something else, as part of your game. I'm excited to see a lot of these guys. I'm excited to see Vince Williams as well.
Vince Williams is somebody that, with the two-way contract situation, nothing's guaranteed. Somebody gets waived. There's some sort of surprise availability. The Grizzlies have been known to swoop in every once in a while.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to watch those guys, the ones that have been around, obviously, and then GG, of course, the one draft pick from the 2022-2023 draft class. It'll be really interesting to watch play out. Grizzlies basketball back tonight against the Philadelphia 76ers on NBA TV, I believe. If you have NBA TV, check that out. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. Again, we're free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Like, comment, rate, review, subscribe over on YouTube as well. All those fun things. On tomorrow's episode, it'll be a 4th of July episode of the show. Damichael Cole will be flying solo for that episode, talking about Grizzlies 76ers. Lots of interesting things to cover on that show. And then I believe in honor of 4th of July, Damichael and I are going to be out celebrating with our families and friends. So there will be no Wednesday, July 5th edition of the show, but we'll be back that Thursday to talk about the next Grizzlies Summer League game. So a preview of the schedule the next few days for us here at Locked On Grizzlies.
Yeah, but we got a lot of good things to talk about. Summer League basketball is about to happen in Salt Lake City. Then after 3 games there, you go to Vegas. I'll be out in Vegas. And as Joe alluded to earlier, Marcus Smart will be introduced on Friday. That's the official
in Las
word.
Vegas.
In Las Vegas. I'll be there. So stay tuned for that as well. I'm sure we'll probably talk about it on Mondays, that following Monday's show. But Marcus Smart being introduced on Friday, and we got a lot to uncover.
That's a big deal. So a busy week, even with the holiday. Damichael and I will take one of our days off. I promise. We're going to enjoy being around family and friends and watching things go boom. But we'll still be here just about every day talking Memphis Grizzlies basketball. So make sure you keep subscribing, liking, rating, reviewing, commenting, all those fun things. Stick with us as the offseason grinds forth. Enjoy Grizzlies basketball tonight. For Damichael, I'm Joe. Stay with Locked On Grizzlies for all your Grizzlies needs. We'll see you next time. Stay locked in.